Welcome back to the San Diego Opera Podcast. This is Nick Ravellis, and my guest today is our Violetta in the production of La Traviata that opens April 22nd, Corinne Winters. Corinne, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, tell us a little bit about yourself because you're making your debut with us. So I understand you're from Maryland, is that correct?
Yes, I'm an East Coaster.
And how did you start your music career? Were you like one of these kids in choirs or high school musicals and that sort of thing? Or what's your background generally?
I had a music background, but not an opera or classical music background. My dad is an attorney, but he's an amateur rock musician, and I was raised with classic rock and that kind of stuff from a young age. But when I found out that I had a voice, I got involved in choir. And that was my real foray into sort of more structured music. I love choir singing. I was an alto back then. I loved singing the harmony line. And when it came time to apply for colleges, I had academic interests as well, and again, knew nothing about classical music or opera. So I decided to take a voice lesson. And my voice teacher said, "Wow, you've got an operatic voice. It's a big voice for a young girl." I said, "Oh, I don't know anything about opera, you know." I mean, most suburban American kids don't. And I had a pretty normal American upbringing. And I started as a mezzo-soprano, and so I learned some songs and one aria for some school auditions.
What was the aria?
The Seguidilla from Carmen. That was my first aria. And
that's a rather high mezzo aria.
Yeah.
Is it not?
Yeah.
So
it's definitely Carmen's highest aria. And
so it should have pointed in a direction that you might be going, right?
That's right. That's right. And the other arias I ended up learning were like Carabino and Dorabella and things like that were for the high lyric mezzo. So it really isn't that different from what I sing now. But I auditioned for colleges and got in and started studying voice properly with the theory training and the ear training and all of that. And at first I liked it. And I liked the challenge, but I still wasn't sold. So I was studying psychology and writing and other things that I was interested in. But my last year in undergraduate, I switched to soprano. And it's a long story, but basically a teacher I was working with went on sabbatical, and another teacher warmed me up higher than I had warmed up before and said, "Whoa, you've got these notes, and it just, you can sit up there better than I thought you could. Maybe you should look at these other arias." And it wasn't just the change in range, because like I said, they're pretty similar. It was more the temperament of the soprano characters that really got me. It was the vulnerability and the honesty and the heart. Not that the mezzo characters aren't, but especially the things I was singing, it was like young boys and sort of the more fun, flirty girls. And that's just not really me and my artistic temperament.
Right. Well, it's just the way that composers in the history of opera have decided to treat certain voice types, right? I mean, the soprano is given generally speaking, is given a certain kind of character to play, which is very different from the mezzo-soprano.
Yeah.
So you're right, it's not just about range. And as a matter of fact, there's some unusual instances like Norma, for instance. Doesn't the mezzo in Norma have a couple of notes higher tn Norma?
Yeah.
It's a color difference and a character difference, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've done Così fan tutte, and I actually had a darker voice than the mezzo that I sang with, and she felt comfortable sitting lower, so she was in fact a mezzo. But I mean, if you heard the two of us together, you wouldn't know who the mezzo was and who the soprano was. So sometimes the lines are really blurred, and I think that's why it's called mezzo soprano and not alto or contralto.
Yeah, right,
you know.
Right.
So it was just more of like feeling like my artistry was actually an expression of who I am, rather than, okay, well, I'm singing, this is fine. And also, I didn't start out with any acting experience because I was a choir singer. I didn't do musicals or anything like that. And I found that opera acting is all about having something to say, first of all, something personal to say, but also confidence, because it's about moving naturally and freely. You don't have to have acting training, but you have to be confident. And I wasn't confident in myself on stage as a solo singer because I believed in my voice, but I didn't know that I had what it took to sort of carry a show or hold the stage.
Well, and you can hide in a choir or in a chorus, right?
Right. Right, exactly. So the soprano roles also got me front and center, where I had to face that and go, do I really want to do this? And I did end up, rising to the challenge. And what I love most, actually, is the marriage of the acting and the singing. But it took me a while to get there. It's a tough road. I find that especially sopranos either start out as choir singers, only being about the singing and being a bit stiff, or they start out as singers that were in musicals, and they're really great on stage but have to work on the singing.
Right.
So there's always something to work on.
I just reflecting on what you've been talking about in terms of your background being quote unquote a normal American upbringing in Maryland. What then was the first opera you saw, and how was that experience for you?
I saw La Juive, a random French grand opera by this composer Halévy, who we've never heard of again.
Right.
But it's this incredible 5-act French grand opera with amazing singing. Neil Shikov was the tenor lead.
Of course, as always. I think he's done every production of La Juive that exists.
I know. I think he has, and I was lucky enough to see it at the Met. I believe it was 2003. And that was my first opera. And it blew me away, but I also...
In a positive way.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Just the sheer power of the voices. And I was pretty far back in the Met. It was at the Met. And my mom took me as a gift. And it was pretty far back, but the voices were still so present and so alive. And I'm like, oh my God, how are they doing that? And then just carrying. But there were times when I got bored. It was my first opera, and I was still a student, and I was still a mezzo also at that time, and I hadn't become a full opera nerd yet. Once I became a soprano, I became a self-professed opera nerd, and became all about the intricacies of the art form and all that kind of stuff. So if I had seen it maybe 2 or 3 years later, I think I would have been just glued. Yeah.
Well, now Violetta in Traviata is a signature role for you. When was the first time you saw La Traviata, and how did you feel about it?
Oh, I studied it actually before I saw it live. The first time I saw it live was with Renee Fleming at the Met. And I think the following year I saw it with Angela Georgiou at the Met.
Two very different approaches, huh?
Yeah, very different approaches. And I'd say that I of course have my own, and there are other singers that maybe I'm more akin with rather than those two as far as this role. But I can see bits of what I do in each of them. Because even though we are unique artists, we also have a tradition. We also have a lineage, and it's an amazing lineage. I never will stop listening to Callas sing this role. I'm not going to steal everything she does, nor could I, because I'm not Callas. But I think it's important to study the singers of the past and the present.
Oh, sure.
To know the traditions and to know different ways to turn a phrase. And you don't have to do any of those ways, but to be aware of them and to be, I guess, even reverent of what these people are doing.
Well, and to know that those are possibilities, that that there are a myriad ways to express yourself in the voice with one certain phrase in this role, and sometimes it can make a difference, can't it? I mean, a huge difference. What are some of the challenges of singing Violetta?
Just basic level is stamina. Vocal stamina, because you're on stage the entire night. You get really, other than the intermissions if you have them, I've done productions without intermission at all. German sort of Regie Theater productions, which are very difficult to do. But often nowadays they only do one intermission. We're lucky that we're doing 2. However, this production is not as cut as other productions I've done. So even though there's more of a break, there's also more music. So it sort of ends up evening out, I think. But vocal stamina, definitely. But
how about the we've always heard, and maybe it's an old canard, I don't know, although I tend to think that this is somewhat true, that Act 1 and Act 2 and Act 3 of this role, they're for 3 different singers in a way. Can you say that that's somewhat true, or do you find it true for yourself, or are you completely comfortable with all 3 visions that Verdi has of this character?
I think 1 and 2 are very different, and 3 is like an amalgamation of the 2 of them. And even the gambling scene is an amalgamation of the 2 of them. But the scene with Germont and Act 1 are opposite ends of the spectrum vocally. I will say, if a soprano is going to take the E flat, I don't...
This is at the end of Sempre Libera.
Yes, which I have taken in the past in every production I've done, but I am no longer taking. And I still have the note. But now that I've gotten older, and this is my 7th production of the role, my voice has just become more connected throughout. And for my voice, and I'm a full lyric soprano singing this role rather than a coloratura, for me to sing an E flat, I have to change the way I'm singing everything else. And I just found that it wasn't worth it anymore, especially in this production in particular and the next one I have coming up at the Royal Opera House. They're elegant productions. They're soft around the edges. They're beautiful and lush and vulnerable. They're not German, tough Regietheater. And in that case, I think the E flat really worked because it kind of came out as a little bit of a cultivated scream, which in that production made sense.
Sure.
But in these productions that are so elegant, it really doesn't.
Yeah.
So for my voice, it doesn't. Whereas Diana Damrau or Natalie Dessay sings the E flat, and it's glorious.
Right.
So I find that I can sing all 3 acts with the same voice, as long as I sing Act 1 as connected as I sing the rest, because that's always the hardest, not just for me because it's the most agile and highest, but it's the first act of the opera, so you're more nervous, you're more sussing things out on stage, and I think even for sopranos who sit well in Act 1, it's still nerve-wracking. Yeah. It's never not nerve-wracking.
It's gotta be. I feel, and the more I study this opera, the more I feel this way, that the duet between Violetta and Germont in Act 2 is just the heart of the piece. I absolutely adore it. There's a real journey there, isn't there?
I 100% agree. I actually just said that in my last interview, that it shows the range of her emotions in a way that she doesn't even fully show to Alfredo, because she doesn't want him to see certain sides of her. He has seen maybe 2 or 3 sides of her, but Germont sees the spectrum. He sees her pride, her obviously selflessness and vulnerability. He sees her anger, which Alfredo really never sees. He sees her desperation, which Alfredo only sees at the end. He also is an interesting one, because Germont is not a villain, but he's selfish. And he's also a product of his time, if you're going to play it that way. And in our production, it is a different time.
Right.
So all those things come into play, which I think is what makes the piece timeless. It's not just another love story. The stuff with Alfredo and Violetta is amazing, and I'm always just charmed and moved when I see productions of it, just seeing their love story as well. But I agree, Germont is the crux of the opera.
It's just amazing writing. I mean, how you communicate a story brilliantly through sheer melodic means. We just came out of a production of Falstaff where Verdi's approach is completely different.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's not a melodic approach. I mean, it really is deeper than that, and in shorter motives and, you know, that kind of thing. But that dynamic drive is still there. But in Traviata and those other great works of that middle period, it's all about the melody telling us what's going on.
Absolutely.
There's not a whole lot else underneath, you know, except papa. You
Right.
know, the chug of the orchestras. Occasionally, you might have something from the orchestra commenting on what's going on, but it is the sheer melodic genius. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It must be very satisfying to sing.
It is. It's the one role, well, I've sung it more than anything else, but it's the role that I can think of my repertoire that I sing now that I could never get sick of, just because the layers. I mean, you can always peel back a new layer of the character, of the music. And I find, actually, I was discussing this with a colleague of mine who is another great Violetta, Joyce Alcori, very good friend of mine. We were discussing how it's common for sopranos as they get older to say, oh, the voice is getting heavier, and you know, and you basically use an excuse to sing sloppily. And we were saying, the older we get, the more we care about the ethic of clean singing, of elegance, of elegant singing. When I was young and doing my first traviata, I was just so excited to be on stage, and I was so ravenous to just run around and be this character. And that was great. And that was great for 28. And now I'm 34 and I'm in a different place.
Oh yeah, you're old now. You're just ancient.
Well, I mean, that is a really big shift for a singer, but also for a woman. That's a little turn in our lives, and now I've just realized, wow, the older I get, the more I really care about just doing exactly what Verdi wrote and just singing it as cleanly as possible and as true to the music as possible.
Well, it's all there, isn't it?
It is. It is all there. Collis's famous quote, if you want to know what to do on stage, just listen to the music.
Yeah. Look at the score.
Yep.
Corinne, thank you so much for spending time with us. I know our entire audience is looking forward to having La Traviata back on our stage. It's a piece we all look forward to, and experiencing your debut here in San Diego makes it all that much more exciting. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.